views and opinions expressed on Explorers Secrets of the Truth or that of their guests or contributors are those of the speakers and do not necessarily reflect the views or positions of any entities they represent. All information on Explorers Secrets of the Truth is provided in good faith. However, we make no representation or warranty of any kind, express or implied, regarding the accuracy, adequacy, validity, reliability, availability, or completeness of any information on this talk show or website.
From monsters and ghosts to otherworldly beings, join the explorers as they venture into the darkest realms, seeking the truth to what goes bump in the night.
There's always a lag.
I saw like nothing.
You saw nothing?
So, no, it like flickered a couple of times. I didn't see anything, but good evening and welcome to Explorers Seekers of the Truth, episode 73. Sit down, relax, and shake off the normal world and journey with us to the other realms of possibility. Tonight, as always, I'm joined by my best friend and co-host, Les Sinkavich.
No, hello,
ahead, Les.
Charles. How are you? It's been a little bit of a break. I think we rusted up pretty well. Forgot how our equipment worked. Had technical difficulties. The list goes on. But it's nothing new. It's nothing new for this crew. How you doing, buddy?
Well, I mean, I have been better. I've been worse.
That's true.
I just want to say condolences. For those of you who don't know, my father passed away May 1st. So it's, I kind of needed a break, and, some people know about our relationship. Some people don't, but, at the end it was good. So that's all in the past and moving forward.
Yeah. Tough times, man. And I relate, and I know exactly how you feel. It sucks when you lose a parent, but not only was it was personal losses, personal events, business events, and there is a lot. So we just needed a bit of a break, and we apologized for that break, but it was very much needed on our end. But anyways, we are back. And thank you all for tuning in. I see Cindy's here. Hey, Cindy. You can, I guess I'll do my normal little spiel thing.
Hello, everybody.
Yeah. You can comment here live on our instant feedback section or on Twitter at Explorers Group or on our website, explorersgroup.com. We are live on YouTube and Facebook. Hopefully Facebook, because I know the interface that we use was saying that there was changes in how it was going to go live. So if anybody is listening on Facebook, comment a comment in the section. Let us know that you're able to hear us and you're coming through live. Is that us on Facebook? I think I heard.
Yeah, sorry. Okay. I didn't realize that my volume
so
up.
Chad just confirmed that we are live on Facebook. So you can comment there. And that's about it. Oh, and we are on Spotify for podcasters, and that broadcasts shares our podcast out on all the popular podcast providers like Apple Podcasts, Google Play, whatever ones you listen to. I believe is iHeartRadio. We're on that one too, so we're on quite a few. Amazon Music. So whatever your choice of listening is, check us out on there. And while you're there, if you don't mind, give us a 5-star review. It would help us, surf through those algorithms and get moved up. So we'd appreciate that.
Yeah. So tonight we are going to talk about the strange disappearance of the lost colony of Roanoke. This was something that was actually requested. A little bit different from our normal topics. It's not really paranormal or cryptozoology related, but
But
it's
it is
definitely something
strange.
interesting.
Yeah,
You
it is a
know,
strange situation.
yeah. So tonight we're going to present some of the more common scenarios and kind of see which ones kind of hold weight and kind of discuss them as we go along.
Right, right. So I guess we'll start with the basic information on the colony, and it starts with Sir Walter Raleigh. He was tasked to found the first permanent English settlement in America, which he then established at the Roanoke colony. And in 1585, the Roanoke colony was founded on Roanoke Island, which is now present day Dare County, North Carolina, by Governor Ralph Lane. A year later, and with any young establishment, they had their share of problems. The two biggest were a lack of supplies and poor relations with the indigenous peoples, in America at that time. And due to a delay in a resupply mission by Sir Richard Grenville, Governor Lane was forced to abandon the colony and return to England with Sir Francis Drake in 1586. Now, 2 weeks later, Grenville arrived and no sooner left to return home, though he didn't depart without leaving behind a small detachment to protect the Raleigh's claim. So the following year, in 1587, a second settlement was set up on the same island by another expedition led by John White. And so the Chesapeake Bay. That attempt became now the flagship pilot Simon Fernandez forced White and his colonists to remain on Roanoke during one of their stops to check in on Grenville's men. Now, he was intending to bring more supplies a year later in 1588, when White returned to England with Fernandez. Now, moving ahead a few more years, the Anglo-Spanish War delayed his return to Roanoke until about 1590. Now, this is the interesting part. He found the settlement fortified, right? But it was abandoned. Now, to make things even more interesting or confusing, the cryptic word Croatoan was found carved into the palisade that fortified the colony. Now, initially, White interpreted to mean that the colonists had relocated to Croatoan Island. He wanted to pursue this clue, but rough seas and a lost anchor forced the mission to return to England and prevented him from following through with that lead. Now, how does the fate of approximately 112 to 121 colonists remain unknown, right? So as early as 1605, there's speculation that they had assimilated with the nearby Indian communities. Investigations produced reports that the Roanoke settlers had been massacred. There were stories of people with European features being seen in Indian villages, but ultimately no conclusive evidence was found. There wasn't really much interest in the matter, and it kind of fell into decline until about 244 years later, in 1834, George Bancroft published his accounts of the events in A History of the United States. And the description of the colonists, particularly White's infant granddaughter, Virginia Dare, cast them as fundamental figures in American culture and captured the public imagination. So despite this renewed interest, modern research has failed to find archaeological evidence to explain the disappearance of those colonists, which is pretty bizarre.
Mm-hmm. So, whatever became of the colonists, now we're going to talk about some theories. David Beers Quinn, concluded that the 1587 colonists sought to relocate to their original destination, which was in the Chesapeake Bay area, and they would have used the small boats that they had left there with them to transport themselves and their belongings. These small boats were plenty big enough for the amount of people that were there.
Right.
And basically his kind of conclusion on this was a small group would have been stationed at Croatown
Mhm.
to await White's return and then direct him to where the transplanted colony had set up. And following White's failure to locate any of the colonists, he pretty much surmises that the main body of the colonists would have quickly assimilated into the Cheeseman Indians, Native
Mhm.
Americans, while the lookouts on Croatown would have just blended in with the Croatan tribe.
Right.
And he suggested that the Samuel Mace 1602 voyage might have ventured into the Chesapeake Bay and kidnapped Powhatans to bring back to England. And from there, these abductees would have been able to communicate with Thomas Harriot and would have been able to reveal where the Europeans were living in which region. He believed that circumstances such as these were necessary to explain the optimism that the colonists had survived after 1603.
Okay. Now, this is kind of going back. Wasn't there like a game plan that they had put together where that if something would happen, they would leave a clue, which is what they were thinking that Croatoan inscription was.
Yeah, I mean, thinking about the history like of any kind of settlement or village or anything like that, there's probably like a standard procedure like, hey, if we have to leave this area, we will leave some kind of marker telling you, hey, we went here, and then from there along the way there will be clues to direct you to the if we went to the next place and it wasn't habitable or we couldn't get to it, that you'll find clues directing you how we went.
Right.
So yeah, I would say the assumption of the writing on the wall, the literal writing on the wall,
Right.
probably was probably part of something they had set up, because the Native Americans wouldn't have been able to spell in
No.
English,
No.
so.
or read it for that matter, right?
Mhm.
But there were separate passages that accused Chief Powhatan, if I'm pronouncing that correctly, whose
I think
proper
it's
name was
Powhatan.
Powhatan. Okay, Powhatan,
I think.
whose proper name was, now this is going to be even more difficult to pronounce, was Wahansanaka. Of slaughtering. He was accused of slaughtering the colonists and the Chesapeakeans. Quinn decided that these events occurred in a single attack on an integrated community in April 1607. He supposed that Wahansanaka could have been seeking revenge for the speculative kidnappings by Mace. In Quinn's estimation, John Smith was the first to learn of the massacre, but for political considerations, he quietly reported it directly to King James rather than revealing it in his published writings. And despite Quinn's reputation on the subject, his peers had reservations about his theory, which relies heavily on the accounts of Strachey and Purchas, if I'm pronouncing that correctly.
Yeah, I wrote the note so long ago. I kind of haven't looked at them since. If you think about the integration, they considering the possibility that the missing colonists could have assimilated into nearby Native American tribes since at least 1605.
Right.
If this integration was successful, the assimilated colonists would, gradually have lost their European ways. I mean, they would have lost their supplies, clothing, and they would have kind of almost been forced to somewhat discard the European culture.
Mm-hmm.
So, like language, a generation or so would still know English, but by the time that second generation is being raised, they would have spoke the native language because that's how they would have communicated with others in the tribe.
Yeah.
Also, you think about the clothes wouldn't have lasted long. A couple of years, you're out in the swamps in the heat. I mean, you're talking about coastal North Carolina.
Mm-hmm.
In the summertime, it's super hot. You have hurricanes, bad storms. Then in the wintertime, it stays, it does get cold at times, but it stays relatively warm. I mean, we were in South Carolina in April and it was
Really?
70, 80 degrees.
Yeah, yeah. Well, you
So,
figure they're lasting what, 1587 was the last time before people had left. And then you're looking at 1606. So you're looking at a 20-year span already at that point.
Mhm.
You know,
Yeah. So
any
you would have,
young kids that were assimilated were probably not even speaking any English, to your point. And like you said, also their clothing, they probably at that point would have had to have adapted to whatever the indigenous people were wearing. So they would have looked like the natives, but to some of those other reports, the English or European features of some of these tribes people.
Yeah.
So it does
also, you got to think about things that they would have got rid of, like agriculture. You wouldn't have tried to farm like you would have in England in the soils of coastal North Carolina, because it wouldn't have worked. So there wouldn't be any, like, you would have adapted to the native way, the Algonquin way of farming, because the European methods wouldn't have been, as successful. And also, even if they were still using some of the European methods, it might have only been bits and pieces where you look at culture, like a parallel development, like, oh, the Algonquin farming method is this, which is a little like ours because they also do this. Well, that little bit might have been a injection of the European agricultural system into the, established Algonquin system. Right. So it would have been more convenient to have just adapted to the Algonquin, lifestyle.
Yeah. And
then you think
for all you know, they're probably forced into it. You know what I mean? If they were brought in as captives, whatever of the colonists that were left, I mean, you don't know what happened. I mean, the men could have been killed off, the women could have been kept alive with the kids or whatever. You know what I mean? You don't know what took place. So what was left, and
hence why it's a lost colony.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Now, Cindy has a question where she says, if they were attacked, would they have had time to write messages? Well, that is a good question, but they did have enough time to build the palisade or the fortified wooden wall that had barricaded the colony. So, I mean, they obviously had enough time to do that. So it must have been a series of attacks that prompted them to want to fortify the colony. So I would imagine, like, once the fortification was up, it wasn't working. You quick scratch that in and get the hell out of there, Or if they were taking people, maybe somebody was able to just quick write it down and take off, or maybe there was somebody left behind and then he went looking for them later. Who knows? That's all part of the mystery.
Yeah. Well, also, if you think about siege warfare, if they're in the Native Americans wouldn't have had the understanding of siege warfare. So it would have taken them a while to figure out how to breach those walls, how to, get into an area where they could attack successfully. So, yeah, you may have had, months of, time where it was raiding parties. They would come up, get knocked back, disappear off into the woods. The people in the fortifications, would have a somewhat normal life, except for these raiding parties. And then once they kind of figured out how to breach the walls, we're thinking about we almost use a European brain when we think about stuff like that, because we've been breaching walls for thousands of years and fortifications, because that was our common practice. For Native Americans, it wouldn't have been. So yeah, they could have had time to. Now, one of the interesting things that is often, written in some colonial era European accounts and observations of people that had been removed from the European society by the natives for any substantial periods of time, people that were captured, enslaved, just went to live with the native, might have been like an ambassador. A large percentage of these people were reluctant to return to European culture. Now, Native Americans who were brought into European culture and lived amongst the Europeans and were taught and educated and stuff like that in the European methodology often ran back as soon as they could to their native people and reintegrated into their society. So, there is a history of people becoming quote unquote Native Americans or being assimilated into tribes and groups, even ones who were enslaved by those groups that went, I'd rather stay here than go back to European society.
Well, makes perfect sense. Because think about European society. There's all hierarchy. There's the upper class, lower class. Most of the people were lower class. Horrible living conditions, even though it was the civilized society. It was the educated. It was this, it was that. If you think about the indigenous peoples, they truly were free. They were just a large community that was more of like a family that all worked together to an end goal. Like everybody's participation helped get you through the year. You know what I mean? And like it wasn't, oh, well, you only make this much, so you're not as good as me. We're not going to help you. We're going to keep moving on and you're left behind. It was a collective community, So I don't blame the escaped indigenous people that went back, and I don't blame the Europeans that were then, I would say, not stolen or captured, but were rescued by those indigenous people. If you think about it, you know what I mean? And they didn't want to go back to the European way of life. I wouldn't either.
Yeah. And that's the thing, and then you think about the descendants, you get, like we said, about 20 years, children who grew up in the native culture wouldn't have any want to go live it, a small percentage maybe would have wanted to go back and try to find their families in Europe or become, re-Englishize themselves.
Yeah.
But I mean, it would be, maybe if you had 100 people, maybe one of them would want to do that. The rest of them would have grown up with the, hey, I'm part of this collective family. We, we can hunt, we can fish, we can live here, we can live there. They also wouldn't have understood hey, we're supposed to have roofs and wooden houses and, stay in the same spot all year round. They would have never grown up with that. So there would be no reason or want, like you said, the freedom of, hey, this time of year, we're going to live out on the coastline. And then when it gets colder, we're going to move here and we're going to have our, society, and we're going to hunt the deer and the alligator and the, different animals. And, who would want to go back to European society where you're eating gruel and, trying to survive in a land, it's hard enough at this point to survive in Europe, which has been civilized for hundreds of years, at least according to, what people say. You had the plagues, you had this, you had that, you live among the natives, you're free, you basically end up raising your own family who is a mix of the European ancestry and the Native American ancestry. So to me, I think it would be I would just assume they moved in with the Indians or, moved amongst the Indians until the, history of it all was kind of put aside, or maybe they wanted to hide from, the Europeans that came back. Maybe they didn't feel safe. Maybe there was a reason, that they willingly just left and went to the Native American groups and integrated.
Right.
So, most historians believe that the most likely scenario for the colonists to have survived is to have integrated with the Native American tribes.
Right.
But then that also opens up the question of which tribes, did the colonists assimilate into? It's widely accepted that the Croatan were ancestors of the 18th century Hatteras,
Mhm.
although that is only, circumstantial evidence. The
Right.
present day Hatteras tribe identifies descendants of both Croatan and the lost colonist. So there is an actual Native American group out there that claims ancestry. Now, I don't know if there's ever been any DNA studies done on these people to see if they actually do have European genetics.
Right. Right.
Also, at this point, even if they are, 75% Croatan genetic lines, there are still so many marriages and generations of um, injected other DNAs into their lines. So it'd be very hard to. You'd have to have the right holotype dating from that group of Europeans coming here, and not just, I mean, my family came here in the late 16, early 1700s.
Yeah.
So, you'd have to go back and identify that holotype and say like, oh, well, it's not because I married somebody from here and had children and that child is half Native American, half American European.
Yeah. Well, yeah, and I mean, your first generation offspring are probably going to have more undiscernible characteristics than, you know what I mean? And the more generations that go on, the more they integrate or assimilate and reproduce with the indigenous people, you're going to lose your European features pretty quickly. I mean, there was
Yeah.
112 to 120 people. You figure if half of those were men, you're just second generation. You're not going to know what they look like anymore, because you're just going to be surrounded by more indigenous people than your colonists.
Well, even if you went one generation and they still had European features, even if you got three generations down and some of them had slightly European features, at that point, it's such a mix of genetics that the European nose structure might look a little familiar to a European, but is it enough to say, hey, that person's English?
Right. Right.
Also at that point, how many different tribes, like the Algonquin,
Mm-hmm.
it's a whole bunch of bands of, smaller tribes that actually make up that group. How many of them, a young man comes into the Croatan, he's considered a brave, young man. He's, has some skills, and all of a sudden he meets the daughter of a little bit further west Algonquin tribe, and they fall in love, and then he moves with them. So all of a sudden you disperse, this 100 and some people start, a couple of them stay with the original, the Croatans, some, start marrying in to other tribes. Well, now you have more and more genetic mix,
Right.
coming into it. So it could be, the features might not necessarily go away, but they're also not necessarily going to be present right away to certain, like the first groups of colonists that do settle North Carolina, Virginia, and stuff like that. They may have seen these people in passing and thought, kind of looks like they could maybe be European, but you also had the Spanish here in the 1500s too. So you have,
True.
Spanish bringing in, slave labor and stuff like that. You had pirates coming in and out of the coast and using, from the Caribbean and coming up into North Carolina and Virginia, even into like Pennsylvania and Massachusetts. You had pirates coming in and
Right.
using those areas.
Well, not only that, but there was obviously, as they stated, a need for
Mhm.
a fortification. So you
Mhm.
take that into consideration. 100, let's say high end 121 people, like they said. You probably figure a large percent of that is males. Most of them probably died fighting. Probably some of the kids were casualties, but the women and children definitely would have been taken away and
Mhm.
assimilated, or like you said, sold off, or whatever. Any males that were left probably were sold off into slave trade, or you know what I mean. So you're taking that number of survivors, and let's just say cutting it in half as a safe
Mhm.
number. So you're looking at maybe at that point 50 to 60 people that might be left. A lot of them are children, or
Mhm.
hypothetically. So that's a smaller number to disperse around. So, like you said, did the
Mhm.
Spanish take some? Uh, did other tribes, were they dispersed off to other tribes? You know what I mean? It could have been just a quick, we're taking them all, they're gone. No trace of this is left, other than
Well,
the
yeah,
fortification.
and I don't even think necessarily taken. I think maybe willingly went with.
Yeah. Well, I mean, think about it.
You
You stay and die, or you go and survive.
Mhm. And you got to think at this point they had already been what with the Anglo-Spanish War going on. They could have figured, oh, maybe the ship returning to England to get us more supplies was sunk or sank, and nobody even knows we're still here. So these people are willing to let us come in with them, walk among them, work with them, and as you go, you're going to lose, like had talked earlier about all the European items,
Yeah.
the clothing, the weapons, you're going to try to keep your rifle good for a while, but you're going to run out of powder, you're going to run out of shot.
Absolutely.
Eventually your rifle is just going to get tossed to the side. You're going to start learning how to use a bow, and most likely being European, they already knew how to use bows too,
Yeah. Yeah.
from hunting and stuff like that. So yeah, this might not necessarily be a taken situation. This might just be a willing assimilation because we've been waiting. We haven't heard anything. We'll leave some markers letting these people know where we are or who we're with, but, you know,
Well, it was 3 years
nobody's ever come. Yeah.
because the Anglos the what was it, the Anglo-Saxon War, or whatever it was that we had mentioned.
The Anglo
Spanish
Spanish War.
War. Yeah, yeah. So that was a 3-year delay for anybody else getting back to that settlement.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And to
You
Cindy's
have no,
point, go ahead.
oh, I was going to say, you have no lines of communication back to Europe like, oh, yeah, we got here,
Yeah.
but there's something going on. We can't leave right away.
Right.
So you're
Absolutely.
3 years into it and you're going,
They're not coming back.
yeah, nobody's coming back for
Yeah.
us.
Because if they're like, oh, well, it
Yeah.
takes 3 to 4 months to cross the Atlantic, they should have been
Mhm.
back within 8 months, 9 months,
Yeah.
worst case scenario. 3
Yeah.
years.
Reloaded, supplied, say 9 months. Yeah.
Yeah.
3 years later, you're sitting on this small piece of land going, yeah.
We're
How
not
long
going to.
ago did they leave?
Yeah.
Oh,
Supplies
yeah.
run
It's
low.
been that long?
Yeah. Well, the whole reason for them to leave was a resupply shortage, or supply shortage. So they needed those
Mm-hmm.
supplies. They were obviously out. They
Yeah.
probably put up the fortification as a last defense. And it was probably like the natives came in and said, look, you could stay here and try and do it on your own, or you come with us and
Yeah.
assimilate. You know what I mean? But we
Although
are
we don't know.
halfway. Go ahead. Go ahead. I'm sorry.
I was going to say, we don't know when the fortification was built.
True.
What if this was one of the first things, being new settlers in an area, seeing these people off in the distance, but not having a way to communicate with them? So the first thing is you create a perimeter.
Right.
And then you guard that perimeter, and then you slowly work your way into communication. So this whole Palisades idea might have been not necessarily a we're being attacked, we need to do something. This might have been, hey, I just saw somebody over there, they took off running. We might want to prepare some defensive, settlement defense. And then all of a sudden it was like, well, we could build, typical European thing is, let's build a fort.
Right.
And you build a fort, and then all of a sudden you realize, like, oh, these people aren't our enemy. They're actually wanting to talk to us or figure out a way to communicate with us, trade with us, and all that. So, that's the whole thing. We don't know an actual concrete timeline on the development of the actual original, secondary colony.
Right. Well, and when Grenville came back and then left 2 weeks later, he did leave that small detachment of soldiers. So that was probably their priority. All right, we're here to protect you. Let's fortify. Let's build up our fortifications, blah, blah, blah. And then from there on, after 3 years, they're probably like, all right, we need to move, or do something,
Yeah.
So, yeah. But we are halfway through the hour. And for those who may just be tuning in, we want to remind you all that we go live every other Tuesday on both Facebook and YouTube. You can comment here live, as Cindy has been doing all night long. We love that, Cindy. Thank you very much. You can comment live on YouTube, on Facebook. We should see them on our interface. Haven't gotten anything from Facebook tonight, so hopefully you guys are able to comment if anybody's listening through Facebook. But yeah, give us a follow on Facebook, like and subscribe on YouTube. It'll help boost the algorithms and our rankings. And like I had mentioned before, we are on all the major podcast platforms: Spotify, Apple Podcasts, Google Play, Amazon Music, etc., etc. And again, while you're there, 5-star reviews, please. It'll help us bump up and get the algorithms in our favor. We would greatly appreciate that. But back to the topic. Some 17th century maps were using the word Croatoan to describe locations on the mainland across the Pamlico Sound from Roanoke and Hatteras. But by 1700, these areas were associated with the Makapunga. Oral traditions and legends about the migration of the Croatoan or the Croatan through the mainland were prevalent in eastern North Carolina. For example, the legend of the Cohair in Sampson County was transcribed by Edward M. Bullard in 1950. And more famously, in the 1880s, state legislator Hamilton McMillan proposed that the Native American community in Robson County, then considered free people of color, retain surnames and linguistic characteristics from the 1587 colonists. His effort convinced the North Carolina legislature to confer tribal recognition to the community in 1885 with the new designation of Croatan. The tribe petitioned to be renamed in 1911 and eventually settling on the name Lumbee in 1956.
Now, some other tribes that were linked or have reported links to the colonists include the Catawba and the Khoury. And S.A. Ash was convinced that the colonists had relocated westward on the banks of the Crowan River in Bertie County, and that they claimed that after being attacked by the Wenatchee and the, how did you say that earlier? The one second. Come on,
Wahansanaka.
Once a Hanaka. God, if we ever learned the words that go into our show, would be great.
It's such a better show. It's such a better show.
We should just
And
stop
then
using these
PH.
words.
Yeah, I know, right? We gotta dumb it down.
Just be like, they were attacked by two different tribes.
Period.
Yeah. The attacks by these two tribes, they had scattered to multiple locations along the Crow River and south to the Pamlico and the Nayusi River. Never heard that one. So, there is some oral traditions in some of the local native groups that there was an attack. Now, here's the thing, too. Like we said, there are several different bands inside, like the Algonquin groups.
Right.
Some of them more warlike, some of them more friendly, peaceful coexistence, some probably more apt to integrate or assimilate cultures. So you might have had two bands that were like, these people don't belong here, attack them. They build the fortifications. The other bands inside that they were, maybe had a better working relationship with could have been like, hey, we can protect you from them, but you got to come with us.
Right.
So we're gonna, our areas are here in this river valleys, and you're gonna start just living with our tribe. We'll set you up. We'll teach you the skills you'll need to continue.
Yeah.
And kind of settled them out into these different pockets in the river valleys. Maybe it was deeper into their territory where these other bands didn't travel.
Right.
So
Well,
there's always that.
True, but this next thing I think is really, really interesting, and it does circle back to our last episode 72.
Yeah.
So talk about this. This is what I think is really cool and super duper plausible.
Yep. So it circles us back to the Moon-Eyed people, or the Welsh natives. Like we had discussed in the previous episode, reports of encounters with pale-skinned, blonde-haired people among various Native American tribes occurred as early as 1607.
Mm-hmm.
And this is frequently attributed to the assimilation of lost colonists.
Right.
It may actually be more easily explained by the dramatically higher rate of albinism in Native Americans than in people of European descent. There was a researcher who had proposed that the colonists merged with the Croatan people. They were never lost. It was made up, and it's the whole mystery is over. Now, this conclusion had been called into question by archaeologists and faculty members at Christopher Newport University, and they basically concluded it as storytelling. It's not evidence based on information. There was an archaeologist, Nick Lacetti, wrote, "I have not seen any evidence of artifacts that indicate the English were living among them."
Mm-hmm.
So there was a book in 2020. It's a book by the author's last name was Dawson. The Lost Colonists and Hatteras Islands admitted that there was no smoking gun of evidence that the colonists had assimilated with the tribe. And the book was also not something that was subject to peer review, leaving, of course, the question open: is it just a sensationalist idea, to get something published and, make some money?
Right. Well, there is another theory, which is, I don't know, questionable, sketchy at best, right? The theory is that they sailed home, right? So the colonists could have decided to rescue themselves by sailing for England in the pinnace, the ship that was left behind in 1587 expedition. So if such an effort was made, the ship could have been lost with all hands at sea, accounting for the absence of both the ship and any trace of the colonists. It's plausible that the colony included sailors qualified to attempt the return voyage, and little's known about the Pennants. But ships of its size were capable of making the trip, although they typically did so alongside other vessels. The colonists may have feared that taking a standard route across the Atlantic with a stop in the Caribbean or the Caribbean would place them at risk of a Spanish attack, and thus chosen to attempt the direct course to England instead. So making such a voyage was not infeasible in 1563. French settlers at the failed Charles Fort colony on what is now Paris Island in South Carolina built a crude boat and successfully, although desperately, returned to Europe. That's pretty wild. And alternatively, the Roanoke colonists could have sailed north along the coast in hopes of making contact with English fishing fleets in the Gulf of Maine. So the Pennants would not have been large enough to carry all of the colonists. Additionally, the provisions needed for a transatlantic voyage would further restrict the number of passengers. So the colonists may have possessed the resources to construct another seaworthy vessel using local lumber and spare parts of the pinnace, considering the ships were built by survivors of the 1906 Sea Venture shipwreck. It's at least possible that the lost colonists could produce a second ship that, with the pinnace, could transport most of their party. Even in these ideal conditions, however, at least some colonists would remain in Virginia, leaving open the question of what became of them. All right, so, I mean, it is feasible. You know, that could have very well happened because the ship was not there, although there were lots of pirates and the Spanish in the area as well. I mean, it could easily have been stolen. But yeah, maybe it was a small party that tried to go back home, didn't make it. You know, they were trying to avoid the pirates and the Spanish, so the direct route didn't make it. Survivors, again, you're leaving yet another smaller number. If there were wars or anything like that, an even smaller number there after, and what little people were left could have very well have assimilated or, you know, just merged in with the local natives, and there you go.
Yeah. And I mean, at this point, you know, if somebody did sail from there, even if they were, you know, sailors of some skill level, they could have easily have been blown off course by a storm, ended up either at the bottom of the ocean, on some island. You know, is it a Spanish-held island? Are they, you know, taken by the Spanish, killed by the Spanish, sunk out at sea by the Spanish? Did they sail up the coast and sink somewhere else, or get blown into, you know, leaving North Carolina, get blown into the Chesapeake, sink somewhere in there, make landfall there, get killed by disease, famine, Native Americans, you know. So there's no clear-cut answer.
No.
I mean, I said to you earlier today, I'm like, did these people even really exist?
That's a very good question.
You know, we say there was a colony there.
Yeah.
So the next thing I'm going to get into is an actual conspiracy against Sir Walter Raleigh.
This I'm looking forward to. I love when you get into your conspiracy theory mode.
So there's an anthropologist named Lee Miller who proposed that Sir Francis Walsingham, Simon Fernandez, and Edward Stafford and others participated in a conspiracy to maroon the 1587 colonists at Roanoke. The purpose of this plot, she had argued, was to undermine Walter Raleigh, whose activities supposedly interfered with the group's covert ideas to make England a Protestant world power at the expense of Spain and the other Catholic nations. So the conspiracy would have impeded Raleigh and White from dispatching a relief mission until Walsingham's death in 1590. Miller also suggested that the colonists may have been separatists, seeking refuge in America from religious persecution in England. Raleigh expressed sympathy for the separatists, while Walsingham considered them a threat and needed to be annihilated.
Hmm.
So
That makes sense.
Now, according to Miller, the colonists were split up, with a small group relocating to Croatan while the main body sought shelter with the Roanoke. The colonists, however, would have quickly spread European diseases amongst their hosts, decimating the tribe, destabilizing the power of the region. From there, Miller reasoned that the tribes were attacked, with the survivors taken captive by the Mandong, a powerful nation of the West that the Jamestown colonists only knew from vague accounts of their neighbors. She concluded that the Mandong were the Endo, who traded the captured surviving colonists as slaves, dispersing them even further throughout the region.
That makes perfect
So let's
sense
just,
too.
let's discuss this conspiracy here. Like I said, do these people really exist? Was there an actual, real effort to set up a colony? Were these people separatists who might have practiced a different religion, non-Protestant? They might have been Catholic.
Right.
Hey, we're going to take you to this thing. We're going to set up this thing. And then once we set it up, you can establish your church, and your church can establish rules. And, I'm assuming Catholic when I say in this ideal, like, you'll be under your rule, your people will rule. Therefore, whatever the Catholic Church, the Pope decrees, you can enforce here without the English actually being able to say, no, you can't do that because it's your own place.
Right.
Also, we're assuming this garrisoned area, this fortified area, was actually theirs. Like, they could have been dropped off anywhere. This thing could have been set up by
The Spanish.
the people. Yeah, could have been Spanish, could have been other English, could have been Welshingham's group or something like that. And they set up this, fortified area because they needed somewhere to come ashore, do some trading with the locals, and then supply, fresh water, get back on their ships, sail to where their groups wanted to be, or they were attacking Spanish, the privateers at that point were commissioned by the Queen. So maybe this was just a privateer holding that they had fortified and used to get supplies, fresh water, food, trade with the natives. Now Miller's theory.
If they were separatists, though, I mean, they could have very well just left on their own accord and tried to come down here to start anew, but were taken out because they were traitors, for lack of better terms. You know what I mean? And they were just, like you said, they were just sent to their death.
Mm-hmm. Or maybe, they had set up the first area, realized it was a setup. Here's the thing. One set of ships drops them off, another set of ships sails in under the British flag, and they realize, like, oh, these aren't the people that are supposed to be coming to get us or help us or supply us. These people, maybe fire a couple cannon shots, start a war with this group that is now, like I said, the whole building of the fortification might have just been a normal, hey, we don't know what's out there. There's monsters in the darkness. Let's build a wall between us and them. It's European culture. We live in houses with walls. the towns had gates back then. Like you didn't just enter a city, you entered through a specific gate from whatever area you were coming from to the city. And then there was gates inside the cities. Like, if you weren't a certain class of person, you didn't come all the way into this part of the city. So it might have just been a normal construction idea. And then all of a sudden, the people who were in this conspiracy were like, okay, the main body that could get back to England or would know enough to defend it has left. Now we just come in and wipe them out, or say, hey, we were told to come and get you guys and take you over here because actually the group, Raleigh was supposed to drop you off here, and he realized it after the fact, and we were ships in passing, and he gave us your coordinates, and we came to get you and move you over here, and they just moved them somewhere up a river, further inland, and again, diseases would have killed off some of them. I mean, Paris Island, I don't know why the French would have picked Paris Island to set up a colony. It's not the most hospitable place in the world. Good fly fishing in that area, but not the most hospitable. Well, I mean, that's why the Marine Corps' major training facility is at Paris Island. It's a swamp. Now, Miller's theory has been challenged based on Welshingham's considerable financial support for Raleigh's expedition and the willingness of Fernandez to bring John White back to England instead of abandoning him and the other colonists. Again, here's the thing. I'm showing you support doesn't mean I won't stab you in the back.
Right.
And it doesn't necessarily mean that, the financial support might not have all been there. It might have been, on paper, Welshingham's support was, say $100,000. Well, in reality, they sailed with $25,000 worth of stuff, but on paper it said it was $100,000. Fernandez bringing somebody back, I'll bring him back. He'll come back to England, ask for supplies, but we know the people who have the money and the ability to resupply him are in on the conspiracy, so they're going to delay. Sometimes not necessarily saying no up front, but hey, it's going to take us 6 months to get everything you need.
Right.
And then all of a sudden, well, there was some kind of issue. We can't sail for another 3 months. And once at 3 months, now you're at 9 months. Now there's a war. Well, all the ships are needed for war activities. There's other people who have been left places, without conspiracies due to wars, like that just could not be picked back up, or, had to, like in the Philippines and the Pacific Islands, there were island watchers who had to assimilate into the native cultures when the Japanese had overspread the Allied ability to supply those people or to get to those people. They just had to assimilate into the cultures, hide in the mountains, So it's not necessarily crazy.
No.
So the secret operation at Beachland. Local legend in Dare County referred to an abandoned settlement called Beachland, located within what is now the Alligator River National Wildlife Refuge. Now, this area has been reported to have had small coffins with Christian markings, encouraging speculation of a link to the lost colony.
Okay.
So now, based on these legends, engineer Philip Mullen and amateur archaeologist Fred Willard concluded that Walter Riley dispatched the 1587 colonists to harvest sassafras along the Alligator River. All records suggesting the colony's intended destination was the Chesapeake Bay, and that England had lost contact with the colony were supposedly falsified to conceal the operation from Spanish operatives and other potential competitors. So you get into the idea of we set up something, we set up the blazing saddles, we set up the fake rock ridge, so when they come riding and roping in, they start, destroying the fake town instead of the real town. So you create this facade of, oh, there's this fortification here, because anybody sneaking in the woods would see the walls and be like, oh, they're fortified, head back to their ship. If they're Spanish, they're going to report. And you got to think the Spanish would have clearly had already been in Florida at this point, St. Augustine and all that, already set up a colony, had already failed at setting up colonies in Florida too. They would have known enough of the natives to kind of have an idea of how to get information, or had enough native guides to say, hey, we need to go see what they're doing, but we don't want to be seen. So you're going to take these 3 guys with your hunting party, and you guys are going to skirt around this thing. So they see this fortified location, but in reality, it's just a dummy fort, for this operation to harvest sassafras,
right,
in a different area. And the fact that, again, goes back to, do these people really exist? Like, we claim this colony's lost. We claim these people on record as being lost, but maybe they weren't even real. Or they were real, but hey, we're actually going to go do this as a secretive, operation. We don't want competitors to find out. Maybe they're fake names.
True.
They sailed under fake names. When they came back, they assumed their real identities. The real identities aren't missing. The fake name identities are missing. There's no, I've done my family history back into the 1500s. Logged at a church, it doesn't exist. Like, people, if their births aren't logged in the church records, it's very hard to find any public record that survives from the 1500s.
I would imagine so. Yeah.
So, also, you're looking at a group who the crown controlled the church. Sir Walter Raleigh was friends with the crown. Could the crown have created these false identities?
It's true. I don't know.
Now, according to Mullen, Raleigh quietly reestablished contact with the colony by 1597, and his sassafras expeditions were simply picking up the colony's harvest. In this view, the colony was not truly abandoned until the secret of the colony's location died with Raleigh in 1618. After that point, Mullen argued that the colonists would have begun to assimilate in with the Croatan at Beachland.
Sorry, I don't mean to tune out there, but I
don't give a shit.
No, I do. I just saw the wife out on the deck there, and the dog was laying on its side, and she got up and went in the house, but I'm like, Jesus Christ, if I have one more problem with another dog, it's going to be the end. But I don't know what happened. I don't know. Lily was standing in the doorway. She looked all panicked and worried, but then they just went in and it looked like they were laughing. So I don't know what happened. Oh God, what am I going to go home to?
Yeah, don't go home.
Yeah, right. Oh, Jesus Christ, it's never ending.
I've slept in your studio before. It's not that terrible.
I know, right? Yes, Ron just commented. So there is Alicia and Ron commented from Facebook. So we are being broadcasted too. Yeah, Hannah, Ron, is I don't know what was going on. I don't know if she threw up or what, because I saw her wiping something off of the deck. Who the hell knows? Probably chewing on a stick. But dogs will be dogs.
Yep.
Sorry, buddy. I just saw that. I'm like, oh God, what's going on? So I apologize. It's live, people. What are you gonna do?
Now, this whole hypothesis largely depends upon oral traditions, unsubstantiated reports about Beachland, as
Right.
well as a 1651 map that depicts a sassafras tree near the Alligator River. A significant problem with this hypothesis is that Raleigh supposedly planned a sassafras farm in 1587 to capitalize on the dramatic increase in the crop's price, so that he quickly could compensate for the great expenses of his failed 1585 colony. The proposed financial motivation overlooks the fact that Richard Greenville's privateering record that cost, or hold on, privateering recovered the cost of the 1585 expedition. Additionally, sassafras prices did not skyrocket in value until the late 1590s, well after the establishment of the 1587 colony.
Right, right.
So, unless he was clairvoyant and thought, hey, this stuff is going to go up in 3 years or 4 years from now, or start climbing, so we better start farming it in advance so we have the rights to the land.
So
Again,
you
it's one of those.
pretty much write that one off.
Yeah,
But still, I mean, it's still a thought. But to your point, I mean, if the prices didn't skyrocket until pretty well after, almost 10 years after the colony even existed, doesn't make sense.
Yeah. So now the one that I could, believe, if these people existed, if these people were here, this is something I could definitely 100% get behind, but also would know that there would not be records of. And that is a Spanish attack. So this comes from...
because nobody'd know that it happened. So of course, I mean, unless the Spanish recorded it, you know what I mean?
But here's the thing: they would have recorded it, but they wouldn't have. Those records necessarily would never see the light of day.
Right. Because you don't want anybody to know that you're eliminating or annihilating their colony or their claim to their area.
Yeah. So this comes from P. Green. Hopefully not.
See a doctor. It's all that sassafras.
So, yeah. While collecting material for a 1937 stage play, notice that the Spanish records from the period contain abundant references to Raleigh and his settlement. Spanish forces knew of English plans to establish a New Virginia base in 1587 and were searching for it before white colonists had even arrived. So you already have people established here working, somewhat relationships with native groups. And, at that point, like, the Spanish Empire had basically claimed, between the Spanish and French, they had basically claimed everything, or it might not have been the French, but the Catholic nations of Europe had basically claimed different parts of the New World as theirs. So the Spanish Empire had included most of North America in their Florida claim, and did not, recognize England's right to a colony in, the colony of Roanoke or the Chesapeake Bay. So given the Spanish sack of Fort Caroline in 1565, the colonists likely recognized the threat that they represented. However, the Spanish were still searching for the colony in the Chesapeake Bay as late as 1600, suggesting that they were unaware of its fate. Again, unaware of its fate, not necessarily we didn't do it, but if they sent one group here and we annihilated them or took them somewhere, sold them to slaves, sold them to the Barbary pirates, whatever we did with them, there would be a constant flow of supplies, so people would show up again if we weren't there to sink that ship as it comes in, or take it over. They would not know necessarily, like, oh, they landed there and then they moved up the coast or up the Chesapeake, and we don't know where exactly they are.
Right.
Also, how well was communication back then? One group of Spanish conquistadors goes in, slaughters these people, takes the women, takes them to one of the Caribbean islands, sells them into slavery, prostitution, whatever. Another group of Spanish soldiers who haven't run across this group are still searching.
Yeah.
Also, they don't necessarily know how many people were there in the first place. Was it 500 people showed up? We got 100 of them. Where are the other 400? The bluffing, the intrigue, the spying. The British could have said, "Oh, we sent 1,000 British subjects to this colony of Virginia and North Carolina," and the Spanish went, "Yeah, we killed 120 people. Where are the rest of these people? Like, we can't find the other, 880." So they could have kept looking, or also allegedly kept looking.
Right.
I killed civilians, and I don't want to necessarily ever have to answer to those crimes. So yeah, we were still in the 1600s. We were still looking for these people. We don't know what happened to them either.
Yeah.
As the world's become more civilized and European groups became, warmed relations and stuff like that, they don't want to admit that they slaughtered civilians. They sold innocent women. War crimes are only prosecuted by those who are the victors.
Right.
And once the Spanish lost, it's a lot easier to say we had nothing to do with it. We never found your people, than it was to say, yeah, we ordered our men to slaughter anybody they found, sell the women into slavery, and move on and not ever talk about it.
Right. Well, all those theories are very, very plausible. I mean, the sassafras one we kind of figured was, maybe not as convincing. But I mean, they're still scouring those areas, and they're finding stuff. They're finding little tidbits of this, that, and the other thing, like little trinkets of all like European-esque adornments, buttons, buckles.
They found
pottery.
They found it. Yeah, there's a documentary on the Lost Colony of Roanoke on HBO Max or whatever it's called nowadays. It's called like the Lost Colony of Roanoke. They actually found a Tudor Rose button.
Yeah.
So basically, with the hypothesis is nobody would have wore a Tudor Rose after 1603. I believe the Queen had died like 1602 or something like that. Mm-hmm. So nobody would have wore a Tudor Rose much after a year or so after that. So how they would have found a Tudor Rose in the site buried underground in North Carolina, unless it is something to do with the, lost colonist.
Interesting. I mean, it all makes perfect sense. So, I mean, there's no denying that there was something there. There was a fortification.
I can deny it.
Huh?
I can deny it.
But something took place. And they are finding some sort of remnants that fit the time frame. It's just where did they end up? The Croatoan, I mean, because they're actually gridding and grafting the Croatoan area where they thought that they had gone to, and they were finding a lot of these things that we're talking about, and they were finding them at the original colony site. So the two areas are matching up with what should have been there at that time. But still, again, it's still left with where are they and what happened. So, and I think it's a mystery that is going to continue on till the end of time.
I say it was aliens.
Because it's possible. That's why that's what the blue-eyed people were, or the moon-eyed people.
Yeah.
They were the aliens that took the colonists. But on that note, go ahead.
Well, maybe they found the Welsh natives, found them, and they assimilated into their groups and were scattered out throughout the western part of the Americas.
That's true. That's true, because their dialect would be more in line. You know what I mean? The Welsh and the English accents that they would have assimilated into them. You know what I mean?
Yeah. Well, there would have been a better chance that there was people in the Raleigh group that understood Welsh.
Yeah.
Because Welsh is a separate language.
Well, yeah, I know, but they're close, and if the Welsh were speaking English at all, you know what I mean? They probably would have then gone to the language that everybody understood. You know what I mean? So, and it would have been a little bit of broken mix of it all after a couple generations. And they would have just assumed it was Welsh. I don't know. It's all speculative. It's all theories. But anyways, on that note, we are well past the hour. Great show, man. I think you did a great job putting the notes together. This one was it was requested by one of our listeners, so I hope we put together some good content for you. This was interesting. Again, it wasn't cryptozoology, it wasn't paranormal or anything, but it is a very strange event that still to this day is unsolved. It's an unsolved mystery of history. But we would like to thank everybody for tuning in. And again, remind you all that we do go live every Tuesday on Facebook and YouTube. And you can comment live here on Facebook and YouTube. And Cindy just commented, so we'll see your comments coming through. While you're on either one of these platforms, if you're on Facebook, follow us, give us a like. If you're on YouTube, like, subscribe, do that whole shebang. And again, like I said earlier, we are on all the podcast platforms: Spotify, Apple Podcasts, Google Play, Amazon Music, etc., etc. While you're there, give us a 5-star review. We would greatly appreciate it. So we will be coming back in 2 weeks. I don't know exactly what the show topic is, but I think we kind of have one in mind, but we got to talk more a little bit about it. So, and again, I want to apologize for the hiatus. I guess it was 3 weeks since we've been on the show last. It's been quite a while.
Yeah, it's been a while.
Yeah, there, like we said earlier in the show, there were personal things and work-related things that just kind of kept us from getting the show put together. So we needed a break, but we're back. We're back, and we hope you guys all stay with us and tune in every other week like you've been doing. So on that note, Chad, again, thank you very much for putting the show together, and thank you everybody for tuning in. We will see you in 2 weeks. Chad?
Bye, everybody.
Good night, everybody.